Well, Katrina, in that you mentioned Bernie Sanders, the nation for only the third time in its history has endorsed a candidate in a primary, Democratic primary, endorsed Bernie Sanders. And I'm wondering why you made that decision.
For more than 3 decades, Bernie Sanders has championed ideas and issues which have essentially been off the radar of our downsized politics. Those very ideas and issues are ones which have animated the nation. At the heart of it, I would say, is you have someone in Bernie Sanders who is the real deal, who is honest, who has integrity, and is a truth teller about the rigged system that is shafting so many people in this country, the inequality that is leading this country to be a plutocracy, not a democracy. And for those reasons, the nation believed it was an important moment to speak to those issues. There are others, but in Bernie Sanders, there's a political revolution that could upend the distorted priorities of this country, the sweetheart deals too many are getting, the grip of banks and insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies on this country, and speak to a better future. And I think he's opened, whatever happens, and we're aware the road to the White House is steep, he has opened space for a more powerful progressive movement, and he has changed the kind of politics that is possible. Think of the fact that he has raised what struck me about our media. And by the way, the Republicans rail against a liberal media. Last night, Donald Trump in the New York Times, as Mr. Turnipseed said, it's not a liberal media. It's a corporatized media system that is rigged against the public interest in our democracy. That's why democracy now exists, or the nation exists. And this media system has failed to, until recently, failed to cover Bernie Sanders and his ideas, and has shamefully lavished attention on Donald Trump. And we think that people have seen through that. And I think the media woke up, I'll stop here, when Bernie Sanders raised, some $70+ million from more small donors than President Obama had in 2008. And I think the sadness is our media system and our politics measure viability by money, but people woke up. But the fact that he is unbought, because he's not taking PAC money, he's not taking corporate money, these are small donors, suggests he could put forth a bold agenda and fight for it.
So what made you decide to do this primary endorsement? You have done it twice before.
Twice before.
Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson and Barack Obama in 2008. I don't think there's any candidate who, Bernie Sanders, again, has spoken to the issues, has lifted up the issues, has represented the issues and ideas, many of them, the key ones that the nation has also. And he, we believe that inequality is probably the existential crisis of our time. Inequality of political power, inequality of economic power, inequality of the ability to engage the world in a different way. And Bernie Sanders is speaking so honestly and truthfully about those issues. He doesn't do small talk well. He also goes into rooms and rouses people. The rallies were as large as Trump's over this last summer. But that is why we believe at this moment that Bernie Sanders is, with integrity and principle, summoning people for a political revolution, as he calls it, which is essentially participatory democracy on steroids, and is needed to upend a system that is pretty corroded. But
Katrina, in that vein, though, the big support he's getting in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, these are two of the whitest states in the nation. And the reality is that the path to the Democratic nomination has to go through the cities of America, through the black and brown communities of America. And to what degree has Bernie Sanders been as active or been as well identified
absolutely.
with the social movements around police abuse, against racial discrimination, around immigration, as he has among Wall Street battling and anti-war issues?
Thank you for reminding me of what is in our editorial. We speak to this very clearly. This is a movement moment in this country. It's a fascinating moment. And Bernie Sanders is also intersecting and lifting up the voices of those movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter. He had tough confrontations with them last summer. He has come forward with a very robust agenda on curbing abusive policing, on racial justice, on ending mass incarceration. He is in constant dialogue with these movements, the climate justice movement, the Fight for 15, reproductive justice movement, the Dreamers. There's no question that he has a tough road Juan, for all the reasons you described. Those two states, first two states, are primarily white, though they've changed too, the demography. But he is very attentive, Bernie Sanders is, to building a larger coalition. A lot of people haven't met him yet. He's heading and working in places like South Carolina and in those states. But listen, I also want to say that the editorial notes that Hillary Clinton is someone of experience, of grit, of intelligence. She's responded to the populist moment. I think she's come more recently to some of these issues of economic inequality. I think of the trade deal where she was moved, again, by the movements of this time. But she would be far, far more preferable to those people we saw on the stage last night. We have a Supreme Court that could be reshaped by the next president. Her foreign policy is hawkish. And I think unlike other progressive endorsements we've seen from groups, we lay out very clearly why we think there is a real distinction between Hillary Clinton's hawkish foreign policy and Bernie Sanders, who's one of the few candidates recently to say, America alone should not be policing this world as opposed to regime change foreign policy, and I think speaks to a better vision of engagement with the world.
What's your argument against Hillary Clinton on foreign policy, her hawkish views?
She has come out and said it was a mistake to vote for the war authorization in Iraq. Has she learned the lessons from that? We argue not. Libya. She was a key supporter of regime change in Libya. What has happened in Libya? It's become a haven for ISIS. She was a key supporter of ousting Assad, which has fueled an ugly civil war. We need to find a diplomatic resolution to that crisis. She supported the Iran nuclear deal, but in so doing, she has rejected a broader relationship with Iran. And so all of those factors, she's very much a Cold Warrior when it comes to relations with Russia. And she, I think one power the president has, Amy and Juan, is you bring a new set of people to Washington. The Clintons, and I never want to link Hillary Clinton to her husband because she's her own person, her own woman. But there is a team of people, particularly in foreign policy, who will be brought back in. And in that context, the hope is with Bernie Sanders. And there is a project underway to, other fresh faces. Wouldn't Washington could be a different place? Obviously, the deep state, but you could bring new people who could see in new ways what is possible.
I want to play a clip of Bernie Sanders, then Hillary Clinton. This is Sanders taking aim at Wall Street during a speech here in New York, a town hall, vowing to break up the biggest banks within a year of taking office.
Greed is not good. In fact, the greed of Wall Street and corporate America is destroying the very fabric of our nation. And here is a New Year's resolution that I will keep if elected president, and that is, if Wall Street does not end its greed, we will end it for them.
So that is Bernie Sanders in New York. Well, last night, Hillary Clinton appeared on Rachel Maddow's show on MSNBC, criticizing Bernie Sanders, calling for a single-payer health care system, accusing Sanders of not laying out how the plan would work or be funded.
The only clue that I can find, because he hasn't laid out a plan, is to go back and look at the bills that he's introduced 9 different times. And it's a bit concerning to me, because it would basically end all the kinds of health care we know: Medicare, Medicaid, the CHIP program, Children's Health Insurance, TRICARE for the National Guard, military, Affordable Care Act, exchange policies, employer-based policies. It would take all that and hand it over to the states. And
well, he calls it Medicare for all. He's basically saying we'd replace the existing
system. But Medicare for all is not the same if you're turning it over to the states. Now, if he has changed his mind after introducing that bill 9 times, he owes it to the public to tell them. If he has changed his mind about having the federal government pay 86% of the cost and having states have to come up with the remaining 14%, when in fact we know Republican governors won't even pay for Medicaid, which they are going to get initially for nothing. Well, That's what we mean.
That's Hillary Clinton. And she is running scared right now. I mean, the numbers, he is really surging. If you believe the polls, Sanders is surging in both Iowa and, of course, in his neighboring state from Vermont of New Hampshire. But what about what she said about single-payer health care and universal
The kumbaya
health care?
moment is over, Amy, as they enter into these two states. Let me just say, though, on the Wall Street clip you used, there's no question that there are two different visions of regulating Wall Street. Bernie Sanders talks about breaking up the big banks. Hillary Clinton is more reliant on regulation. I think, again, Senator Sanders is unbought and able to speak honestly about what he would do. Hillary Clinton has moved on those issues. On the single payer, what struck me is how politically, if I could, tone deaf what Hillary Clinton's doing, because Medicare for All is so popular among not just the Democratic base, but so many people. Why not say, Senator Sanders may be unrealistic. We can't get to Medicare for All as quickly as he's saying. It's too expensive. But in fact, what she's saying is mischaracterizing this idea that it's all going to go back to the states, that he's going to take away your Medicare, your Obamacare, your CHIP. He's not. And she's not attributing the cost savings. We are the only Western industrialized country that doesn't have health care for all. We're paying more. The pharmaceutical companies are ripping us off. And she should be saying, okay, Obamacare is here, but the history of American reform is we got to build on it incrementally. Instead, she's kind of saying, he's trying to take away your health care. No, he's not. He's trying to bring you Medicare for All, which is very popular and has been stymied by pharmaceutical companies. So I think it's a misguided attack, and I think it's misguided of her also to take Wall Street Journal editorials attributing how we'd all have to pay $15 trillion more without understanding the benefits of savings if you had a single-payer Medicare for All program.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Tom Turnipseed if he's still with us to talk about the legacy of this politics of fear that you mentioned was shown in the Republican debate. George Wallace did not succeed, obviously, in 1968, but he did get 13% of the vote as an independent candidate. And he probably took more voters from the Democrats than he did from the Republicans, because that was the year that Nixon beat Hubert Humphrey, and basically paved the way, many believe, for the Republican Party to begin grabbing ethnic white voters out of the Democratic Party. Do you see in this new politics of fear any possibility, sort of a realignment of the voters around some of the ideas of a Trump or even a Ted Cruz?
Gosh, it's hard to tell. I know they're appealing to, in my opinion, to poor white people that feel like they've been kind of left out, and that's a big similarity. The one thing too that's very, very interesting to me is how this idea of Donald Trump and how he's really using that fear thing. And, you got to be afraid of the Chinese and the Mexicans and so forth and so on. And he's doing a hell of a job doing it, too. The other thing I want to say and get this in edgewise, I was trying to tell it a minute ago, me being here in South Carolina and maybe knowing a little bit about what's going on, is that when Bernie Sanders came down here, he spoke to a couple of African-American colleges, that are predominantly African-American, and got a real good reception. He's doing a good job at working the African-American vote down here. I guess Hillary's still a little bit ahead, with the African-American vote and maybe overall, but he's coming on strong here in South Carolina, believe it or not.
Well, we're going to leave it there right now, and I want to thank you both for being with us. Katrina vanden Heuvel, editor and publisher of The Nation magazine, for the first time in 150 years in its history, the third time, they have endorsed a candidate in the Democratic primary rather than waiting till afterwards. And Tom Turnipseed, national director of the segregationist Alabama Governor George Wallace's 1968 presidential campaign, calls himself a reformed racist and became a leading civil rights activist in South Carolina. This is Democracy Now!